All right, folks, we will get started. Feel free to come in and take a seat. It's a great turnout. All right, well, thank you all for being here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Joanna Benoit, and I have the honor of being the chair of our town council here in Freeport. I'm really excited about tonight. What is happening downtown actually feels pretty personal for me. When my husband and I were looking for our first house, I was finishing my master's at USM. He was commuting 45 minutes for a job here in Freeport. And when we were looking, Freeport was just not even on our radar. For people with our budget and our circumstances, it just didn't feel accessible. So when we bought our little tiny house on Route 1, I was delighted. It was pure luck, but I was so happy. It's technically walking distance to downtown, but as soon as I settled in, I kind of realized two things. One is it was not particularly safe for me or my neighbors or their kids to walk over some of the obstacles, I'll call them, on my section of Route 1. And two, no one really lived downtown. That became apparent very quickly as soon as I settled into living here in Freeport. And, you know, those things kind of got under my skin. I thought about it a lot. And I knew other people certainly felt the same way. And little did I know at that point that the town, as in residents, all of you, were steps ahead of me, already talking about these things. This was around the time of the downtown vision was in progress. Soon followed the climate action plan that, among other efforts that Brett will talk about today, all said kind of the same thing. We want a downtown for everybody that we can walk and bike to, that has art and culture, that has a good, strong business ecosystem, and was a place to gather. And then in 2025, the council adopted our new comprehensive plan, basically essentially embedding those 10 plus years of community input and engagement into the core planning document for our town. So where are we now? Since June of last year, Freeport has shifted into implementation mode. We're squarely entering into our implementation of those plans and making sure that we take that community input and see it on the ground, see it in downtown. We've engaged in a planning partnership with Maine DOT, with Spec Dempsey, who are experts in town planning, and Stantec, experts in engineering. The goal of this partnership that we're calling the Village Corridor Initiative really is to take these plans, these big topics, these big values and ideas, and bring them closer to the ground, ready for implementation and funding as soon as it becomes available. So tonight is really an exciting milestone. The team will spend some time sharing what we're calling the build-out analysis. So this isn't a promise of what will happen 100% on the ground, but instead it's a tool to identify key projects and areas that we can get close to shovel-ready as opportunities arise and funding becomes available. This will be for things like multimodal paths, art, housing, open space, things that we have identified that we want as a community. So next we will hear a bit from the chair of the planning board, Sam Kapala. He'll talk a little bit about land use planning updates around our design review ordinance and zoning. Then we'll hear from Stantec on the project and the build-out analysis. Afterwards, we will have about 10 minutes each for question and answers from the planning board, then from council, and then from the public. It's a very packed hour we have here. So if folks are online, there is a Q&A button on Zoom. I believe you can press to type in a question. And then we also have index cards in the back, so that way if we don't get to your question, we'll be sure to follow up after the event tonight. And so with that, I will pass it over to Sam.
Thank you, Joanna. Welcome, everyone. It's always good to see so many familiar faces in these rooms. I know we have a core group in Freeport of folks who really care about this town and are always willing to show up, and I really appreciate all of you for coming out. It's especially good, however, to see new faces here, and I want to encourage all of you to keep showing up and keep coming out to these meetings, planning board meetings, project review board meetings, town council meetings. We have a lot of groups who care and who are working really hard to advance all of these efforts in town. So thank you for being here. Thanks also to town staff and our consultants who continue to work hard on this. Joanna talked, I think, succinctly and very well about how we got here tonight, some of the stuff that the planning that has gone into the last couple of years and gotten us to this point. One of the things we've heard is we've been planning to plan for planning for quite a long time. We've all been here. We've all put dots on posters. We've seen maps. We've said, yes, this, not that. And I think this is a really exciting night because it represents a step that feels more concrete. Like, we are evaluating existing conditions. We have the opportunity to put some of the things that we've been talking about into, quite literally, I think in some cases, into concrete, into reshaping our roads, into reshaping our pathways, connecting parts of town that haven't been connected, as Joanna mentioned. I do take issue a little bit, Joanna, with your statement that nobody lives downtown, because I live actually just a little bit closer to town than Joanna does. But I spend a lot of time downtown. I don't know if I actually live downtown, but I do spend a lot of time downtown. I want to see downtown thrive and grow, and I want to see more cars and more people. And all of these visions, I think, have been affirmed by the planning efforts that we've gone through over the last several years. So this is really maybe not the culmination, but it's a step on the path, and we are building on the work from the last few years. So it is an exciting night. Ultimately, what we're talking about here and what the planning board will be thinking about as we review and digest the findings from our consultants, this is about responsible growth, responsible development. It's about taking all this planning work and putting it into action in the best, most efficient way. It's about not leaving things on the table, about not missing opportunities that we could have taken, not leaving, prime lots or pieces of prime lots undevelopable because, somebody came in and wasn't looking at the bigger picture. So we're trying to take this opportunity to look at the bigger picture and provide that information to developers and people who might bring their own spin on visions to help us build the community that we want. So I think Joanna mentioned the Downtown Vision Plan, Climate Action Plan, and recently our brand new and very exciting comprehensive plan, which was just adopted a few months ago. We have also been going through a design review update, and we've been talking about it actually since, if you can believe it, since before the pandemic. We started talking about it. The pandemic kind of put the brakes on that project for a little bit, but we're coming back around. We are nearing the finish line on a design review update that looks at all of downtown, and the planning board is in the process of updating or starting to look at updating some of the commercial districts, the C1 and C3 districts, which cover parts of Route 1, parts of the study area for this initiative, the Village Corridor Initiative, and then also even further south. So we are taking a look at making our zoning more cohesive, making the zoning maps align better with what we have on the ground now, as far as infrastructure and transit and all of that. And then we will be looking to hopefully make it easier and easier for people to understand, I think, where the height restrictions and density, how it changes and how it supports the vision that we have outlined in the comprehensive plan. At its core, I think the comprehensive plan supports a denser downtown. It supports additional height for buildings, specifically where we are right now, really in this neighborhood on Depot Street, on both sides of Depot Street, where the additional height will have less of a visual impact and impact the character of downtown less, and it will allow for a wide variety of housing types, and we are really excited, I think, to see some of those projects actually come to fruition. They're not in the ground yet, but we do have, I believe, one project that has its final approvals and another that is working its way through the process right now. So we've been working toward that for a long time, and it's exciting to see some of that work come to fruition. As we move outside of this little district, we are continuing to focus on maintaining the character of downtown, but we are also looking to allow for more development, infill development, ideally that fits in with the character of our existing downtown. And then as we move a little bit further out of downtown, we would like to see different types of development, but really the focus is on housing and on mixed-use development and maintaining a walkable community and a vibrant community. So I'm really excited, I think, to see I am really excited to see what Stantec has brought to the table here, and excited to see where we might go in the future, what the possibilities are. Of course, it's not up, the town is not going to go out and actually build these projects. This is all, as a planning board, we kind of set the table, and we try to make the regulations as streamlined as we can, while also balancing the interests of the town and environmental interests and protecting our resources and all the rest. So it's a delicate balance. It's an ongoing process. I think we've done some of the work. We've started to see some of the rewards in the form of some of these new housing projects that have come, and the interest that we see, renewed interest. I think talking to people, talking to town staff, and talking to developers, our reputation is on the rise. It was in a pretty low spot a few years ago with a development community. We had a bad rap, and I think we're fixing that, and we're starting to see the benefits. It is and will be an ongoing process, and I think the planning board is always excited. We often have spare attendance, maybe, would be fair to say, at our meetings. So I encourage people to come out and see what we're doing at the planning board and continue to be part of the process, continue to have your voice at the table, because none of us really knows how this is going to go. We can plan, and we can plan to plan for planning, as I said. We can change our zoning. We can do it all with the best of intentions, and there are still many, many, many forces that are outside our control. There are market forces, there are cultural forces, all kinds of things that are outside our control. So it is an ongoing process. I think I'm really excited to be at this point in the process, and I hope the rest of you share that excitement. But please enjoy the presentation, and please don't ever feel like the planning board isn't happy to listen to comments. We always want people to come out, write in, be part of the process, be part of meetings, and I think we're all in this together. So I was given 10 minutes. I hope I didn't use all of it, because like Joanna said, we have a lot to get to, and I'm excited to see. So thanks again for being here.
Again, hey, I'm Brett Richardson. I'm the development director with the town, and I just want to thank everybody for coming out again tonight. What a great turnout. We're excited to have Jason Schreiber and Jessa Berna from Stantec, as well as Matt Drost from Maine DOT. And Matt's going to give us a quick overview right now about what a planning partnership initiative is and why it's important for the town of Freeport. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks very much, Brett, and good evening to everybody. Just like Brett said, I'm going to offer just a quick overview. The Village Partnership Initiative was established a few years ago now to really speak to community interests and needs. Maine DOT does a pretty good job. Opinions may vary on how well we handle asset management around the state. That's definitely our strength. But noticing that a lot of communities had some more local interests that were larger than just adding a crossing or a sidewalk to a small section of a highway pavement project, the Village Partnership Initiative is really meant to address some of these larger needs that the communities have identified. It is a partnership. In fact, I am so pleased from the warm welcome I've received from everybody in Freeport to discuss these projects and concepts, and working together on something that's satisfactory and buildable by Maine DOT and by our standards, but also speaks to the local interest and vision that everybody has here is really important. So we're very pleased as well to have Stantec here to present some of these concepts that have been informed based on these conversations and all of the planning efforts that you've done previously. And really I'm glad to be here at a stage when these choices can be made and put together on paper and move forward with a project that could be funded. We'll be a funding partner with you in any share that's not, let's say, a federal share on a larger scale project or on some small incremental improvements as we see them in the short term or longer term with state funds as well. So very, very pleased to be here, and thanks very much. I'll now turn it over to the Stantec team.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everybody. My name is Jason Schreiber. I'm a senior principal with Stantec. I'm actually out of our Boston office. I've been doing urban planning and transportation planning for over 30 years and had an opportunity to work in a number of Maine communities, but also all across North America and overseas. And I hope that a lot of the ideas that we're going to talk about here today resonate a little bit. You know, we recognize that a lot of the concepts for making places grow and accommodate growth in a sustainable way are things that have been practiced, tried and true all over the world, actually, quite successfully. And it seems to me that a lot of what's been set up here through previous work, your comprehensive plan, the dog bone report, the vision, and other things that have been mentioned here, really kind of sets the stage for being smart. And, you know, we all know that Freeport has changed already. The retail environment in particular has absolutely changed. Housing costs are a problem. Communities are changing and aging, and we all need to sort of react. And a lot of that has happened just in the last 10 and 20 years rather dramatically. So I think this is a great opportunity to think about what it might be in the future. That said, you know, we're an engineering and planning firm. We are always trying to be as detail-oriented as we can be. But this effort is not intended to be overly prescriptive. In fact, we're trying to be as visionary as possible, but still bringing in some hard analysis. And as I think was stated, we're trying to bridge the gap between good ideas and what may come in the future. So some of the stuff you'll see tonight is hopefully an idea of what may come in the future. But we first need to understand, you know, kind of where it all comes from. So we've done some pretty detailed analysis, and my colleague Jess is going to walk us through that. And there's some ideas for what things may look like in the future. And I'll mention, you know, it's great that Maine DOT was just here as a partner in all of this. This is a great project with their funding and their commitment. They've been a part of some of this change throughout the course of this last year. This is not the last time you'll see us. We'll be in town again, and we won't be producing a final report until probably the fall. But we definitely are curious about folks' input, particularly the boards who are here tonight. So Jessa, please come up, introduce, and let's get rolling. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I'm Jessa Berna. I'm a transportation planner working with Jason on this project. I'm actually based out of Portland, Maine, so more local. It's really exciting to be working here in Freeport. Tonight, I really just want to give an overview of this project, where we have gone, where we started, where we are right now, talk through the existing conditions report, talk through our build-out analysis and development plan, also talk about some of our transportation alternatives and get some ideas. This project is interesting because it is a transportation corridor project looking at Route 1, but it also incorporates a land use component. As you're planning for future growth, how can we make sure that the transportation infrastructure serves that growth and change over time? So our project area goes from Maine Beer Company, the Park and Ride in the southern end, up to Mass Landing Road in the northern section, right through the downtown. For a lot of portions of our analysis, we've kind of divided the corridor into three sections, just sort of based on the character. Village Gateway in the southern area, the downtown village in the middle, and then the northern corridor, which is much more rural in character as its own area, just so we're not kind of combining some different areas. As everyone has said so far, we are really building on a lot of the planning work that's been done before in this community. I've heard, you know, one more DOT exercise in this community might be just done. So we want to make sure that we're taking everything that you've already told the town that you want and trying to make it a little more concrete, a little more actionable, but sort of building on that. You know, in the downtown vision plan, you really focus a lot on what kind of form you want to see, what the downtown will look like, what kind of density it will be. But it wasn't looking at the concrete level of like, how can this roadway accommodate this growth here? So we're going to get into some of the details a little more. We're also looking at the recently adopted comprehensive plan and looking at where the community is, where you have said you want your future growth to be, and looking, you know, in the weeds at the dog bone report that really outlines a very comprehensive TIF district and also prescribes future densities throughout this corridor and sort of has a plan for making sure that as the community grows, there's a way to pay for those improvements along. So we're kind of building off of all that, as well as looking at the climate action plan and the active living plan as well. So in addition to looking at building off of these previous studies, we want to plan for future growth in this study. We want to improve public spaces, and we want to enhance the safety for all users throughout this corridor. Just to give you a little history on this project, we began working on it back in May of last year, and we did have a pretty public event with urbanist Jeff Speck, who shared a lot of his insights in the downtown that we're incorporating into our study back in June. Over the fall, there was a demonstration project at Main Street and Bow Street, as I'm sure all of you saw. That demonstration project was really aimed at testing whether or not the roadway could accommodate an all-way stop at that location. It wasn't the prettiest, it wasn't how we would recommend that intersection being at the end, but it was really to kind of test whether or not the roadway functions, whether there was excessive queues at that location. And from that perspective, it was a great success. Over the fall, we also completed a build-out analysis, which I'll talk more about in a moment, and an existing conditions report, so we really understand what's happened on the ground in Freeport to date. Coming up, we are looking to finalize our coordinated development design, which shows where future growth might go within this corridor and how we can accommodate that growth, and also look at some transportation alternatives throughout this corridor. So how can that corridor change over time? We plan on having our next sort of public outreach in April, where we'll have a public meeting and a survey. More to come on that in the future. And in June, we are hoping to have a second demonstration project at the Main Street and School and Elm Street intersection, also with an all-way stop, hopefully a little more aesthetically pleasing, with our final plan in September. Just quickly, I kind of want to walk through our existing conditions just to, sort of demonstrate and share what we learned. We looked at the existing land uses in the area and the current zoning to really understand what's happening on the ground right now. We also took note of where environmental and historic resources are, as these can be sort of, limitations to growth and change and important community assets. We looked at the roadway safety. Where are the points that are high crash locations right now? Where are there conflicts? Where are bikers and pedestrians having crashes? And where are the safest parts of the corridor as well? We looked specifically at the bicycle infrastructure. You've got some really great shared use paths recently constructed and in the pipeline already. Some of the on-road facilities, particularly bottom left where there's sharrows through lanes of traffic, has some room for improvement, I'll say. We looked at the pedestrian infrastructure as well. We found there's decent sidewalk connectivity, but sometimes the sidewalks are a little narrower than you'd like, and also maybe not enough buffer from the travel lanes. We also looked at the transit infrastructure that exists. I think one of the great assets that Freeport has is that downtown train station. And it's great to see that there's already, Metro Breeze service through here. And as the corridor grows, hopefully we're anticipating that there can be more transit options available in Freeport as well. We also looked at the existing traffic levels of service, and also, how are the intersections performing, and how much traffic is going through Freeport right now. So a major reason why we look at the land use and the transportation number of vehicles going through the town is so that we can look at how growth will impact the transportation network. Can the transportation network accommodate this growth? And usually when you look at this sort of from a technical engineering perspective, the first thing you do is kind of look at this ITE manual that has if you add a shopping closet, that's gonna have this many vehicle trips per day, and it sort of assumes this. You drive to one location, you go out to a main road, and you come back sort of, like you can see in the upper left corner here. But what downtown Freeport has is more of an interconnected park once strategy. And that strategy really increases the roadway capacity while you add density. And as you add more density, you can not add a lot more vehicle trips to the road. So understanding those existing conditions allows us to kind of build out a model for the future that does not overestimate the amount of traffic you are receiving in this area. So it's really kind of cool because this community has so much potential to add more development in the area where you want to have it, while also narrowing some of the travel lanes, slowing speeds, making it safer, and also adding better accommodations for bikers and pedestrians and increasing transit all at the same time. So in order to get a better sense of where development can go in this town, we really went into detail about, from the previous planning studies, looking at the dog bone report, looking at the village downtown plan, looking at the comp plan, and we heard from you, you want to be able to accommodate most of your growth over the next generation in this corridor, and that allows you to keep sort of the rest of the community more rural in nature. And that is a great goal and aspiration, and the TIF district that is outlined in the dog bone report really sets you up for success financially for that, making sure that you have the money to pay for any infrastructure improvements throughout that area. We wanted to get a little more detailed about where will that growth go? Is there actually the room? Is there the capacity of the roadway system? So our first step, and I apologize that these slides are kind of washed out. They will be available online afterwards. So just bear with me, apologies. So what we did is kind of a very technical analysis of where is there available land that is prime for development, and try to analyze what that means in terms of density and what can be fit, basically. So we looked at specific zones. The same zones outlined in the dog bone report were included in this analysis. And then we looked at properties, and this is basically to assess like ripeness for redevelopment. And then we looked at parcels with a lower assessed value. If your assessed value is relatively low, that means maybe there's not something that's really successful there, so it might be more advantageous for someone to want to develop those properties. And then we looked at the assessing database and included lots that were a parking lot, or they were coded as an undeveloped lot or a potential development lot. So these are properties that are largely not developed or have more development opportunity based on their assessed value. We also made sure to exclude parcels that were unlikely to be redeveloped, not that they can't be, but that are just unlikely, like single-family homes on small lots, for example. So through this analysis in this corridor, we included 99 lots, a total of 380 acres. So that's a lot of land. If you imagine some of the densities for that much, that would be a ton of development, but that's not gonna happen. So our next layer was to add in some environmental constraints, like where can you actually, in reality, develop? So we took out steep slopes and water bodies, vernal pools, conserved land, hydric soils, things that are really true barriers to development. And then we also kind of looked at areas that were like blocked off due to those resources, sort of like unreachable based on that. So from there, we kind of narrowed down within this study area the potential future buildable land to about 180 acres. From there, we did some math. Basically, we divided these parcels out by zone. We applied the assumed housing densities outlined in the comprehensive plan and the dog bone report, ranging from 8 to 16 units per acre in the rural residential zone, the RR1, up to 40 to 50 in the downtown in the VC1. So having that range, and we did the math for the short term and the long term. And what we found was, but in the next 7 to 10 years, you could accommodate between 420 and 800 units, which is right in line with sort of the assumed expected housing units per year of 60 to 80 that's shown through the analysis done in previous planning studies and set in the comp plan and the dog bone specifically. And then long term, and we're talking very long term, 50 plus years, we anticipate this area could accommodate, if all things fall into place, between 2,000 and 3,000 units. So a lot of units, but very long term. So after doing that analysis, sort of at a very technical level, I think we had some understanding and sense that this area really could accommodate what this community has said that you want. And then what we did is we had conversations with property owners impacted by this, or like that are within this area. And we had conversations with the town about where they're seeing development and where they expect to see development in the future. And we looked at where there was need for more connectivity, and we allocated areas sort of based on those conversations and based on what we saw during our build-out analysis of where future development could occur in the short term. So this map shows kind of 6 bubbles that could accommodate where these 700 units over the next 7 to 10 years could go. And we also shared where some additional connectivity might enhance the transportation network at a very high level. We're not saying this road must go here, but having a connection around here might be of value. And similarly, we looked out 50 plus years. Where could we put 3,500 units? Sort of within those same envelopes, those seem to be the areas that are most prime for development. Not to say that development couldn't go other places, but as a community wanting to be thoughtful and think forward and plan for the future, this is where we felt it made sense and was most likely to occur. For your input, we're still a work in progress, a draft. And we want to have a lot more conversation about this, and we will continue. That is really more the focus of tonight, is sort of looking at that build out. Does that make sense to you as a community? Is that what you were expecting from other planning studies? And we want to hear input from the council and the planning board as well as the public. The second piece of this is, once we have a sense of how much development might occur and where it might occur, we want to make sure that our transportation network can accommodate that. I had a meeting with the Complete Streets Committee yesterday morning, and we also met with some developers and other people this afternoon, and we are looking at some different transportation alternatives right now, kind of making sure that the roadway can accommodate that growth, and also understanding that we do have a lot of room to add a lot of development within the existing infrastructure. So we are looking at different cross sections throughout the corridor. Here's some considerations we're looking at in the Village Gateway area. Is there an opportunity to add a multi-use path on one side of the road, or more sidewalks, or to have more of a buffer between the roadway and the sidewalk? Can we narrow the travel lanes to increase safety and reduce travel speeds? Looking more in the downtown village, the travel lanes are really wide. Is there an opportunity to narrow the travel lanes, to add a buffer so that the sidewalk does not directly abut the travel lanes, to make the walking experience more comfortable? Or is there a desire to add more bicycle facilities downtown? These are some of the questions we're asking now. In the northern section of the corridor, this area becomes more rural in nature, in character pretty quickly. We're looking at how do we add a multi-use path to this section moving forward in the short term and the long term within the existing sort of footprint, or do we need to expand out? One of the great news in this community is you have a very wide public right-of-way, so everything we're proposing is within the state right-of-way, so we're not needing to take any land to make some of these improvements, even if we're going a little bit wider. Just to kind of close out before questions, some of our next steps include looking at this development design and making sure that we've made any adjustments from the community from what we're hearing this week, having that in the next month. We're also planning on having a more visually pleasing, sort of more in the style of your village master plans or build out, so that it's something you can kind of see and visualize as a aspirational view for the community of what that development might look like. We are also planning on having a draft of what the demonstration project might look like at Elman School, so that the community can start thinking about that. And we're also in the process of planning some public engagement outreach in April that we would love to have all of you attend, and we will have more information about that forthcoming. Our next touch point with the community is we have a joint council meeting and Complete Streets meeting on February 3rd, where we plan to give a little bit more information, some updates on the project at that time. Yeah, I think that's the plan. I think we had the planning board first for questions, and then the council was. Yeah.
Well, if you don't have any, it's all wonderful.
Yeah, so if you're on the planning board and have some questions. Yeah. Yeah.
Step up to the microphone. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Questions at that microphone, I think, because we're mic'd here. Jason, why don't you share with me for questions?
So I'm on the planning board. I have some questions. One is about timing, And so I'm not sure you're the right one to answer, maybe the Maine DOT guy is, but just so that we have, the whole community has some idea about timing. And then on the profiles of the road. So, I mean, I watched the Complete Streets presentation yesterday, and my quick answer was that they all looked good. And so I'm wondering, how do you get to a decision, and what can we do to help you get to that decision? I mean, it did seem like just the idea, I mean, just to the whole community, we do have wide roads here, and we don't need them. And if we didn't have them, we could have more other things. And at the same time, we would slow the traffic. So I think that, and as you see, there's I think the long-term future that's being tested is a series of all-way stops as you go through Main Street. So Main Street will get slower and I think more commodious for bikes and people. So that's the question. How do we get to a decision on the profiles and timing?
So I'll say one thing that's interesting about this work. I mean, I think we're going to get to a point where there's a plan that's sort of like a vision that hopefully is helping to move things forward by this fall. But in truth, stuff is already happening. You know, the demonstration project for the roadway, for instance, that you had this summer, and maybe another one coming up this year, is a catalyst to maybe do things that are even in your own control. So, you know, the town can stripe some of these lanes narrower already with Maine DOT saying that's a good idea. And so you can build on that vision already yourselves. But similarly, you've got development in the pipeline. So, you know, there's some buildings that are approved right near here at these densities that we're talking about. And that stuff's going to build upon itself over time. I think from our perspective, our understanding is the town's plan has been to slowly kind of build over time, building on that vision, building on what's in the comp plan, seeing what the build out can be, but also is simultaneously trying to make other zones in the corridor have more flexibility to be able to accommodate development. And I think that's one of the near-term next steps, which is to be able to let more places maybe develop similar in fashion to what we're seeing in downtown. Our hope is that it develops in a way similar to what we're talking about, but there's no specific plan. We'll eventually have a report that draws a pretty picture of what it might look like, but that's just one person's pretty picture. But we know that that is the kind of thing that, as long as the community supports that general picture, the general notion of what the roads may look like, the general notion of kind of where development might happen, that says to a lot of people, well, I can go ahead and do this. Now, that might be local landowners who want to develop, people who are coming in from the outside, it could be partnerships, and that's also what's interesting, is that the town is here to work on partnerships as well. It has tax increment financing established to be able to kind of co-fund some of this infrastructure. Maine DOT is on board with being able to allow a lot of that to happen. Much of this infrastructure, as you had seen on those maps, is maybe new roads and paths that are not just Main Street and Route 1, and that's not always easy for somebody to do. And that's why the town is there to be a partner to that, hopefully to be a partner with funding. So I think a lot of this, yeah, you're not going to see 700 units for several years. But really that map, and if folks want to see it later on in the evening, it's right up front. It's not a lot of buildings to be able to get to that, but what that does is it creates more of that sense of community, more of that kind of placemaking, and it can really be its own success. I don't think we'll get to 2,000 or 3,000 for 40 or 50 years, but it's a possibility.
I mean, particularly with the road.
So the roads are, you know, road funding and financing, and, you know, Matt can talk a little bit about Maine DOT's funding for this. It is a state-controlled roadway to a point, and then it's a town-controlled roadway. And I think they work in partnership because it's still a state-designated route. But, you know, Matt has said before, the through route is I-295. In this area, Route 1 can be something more akin to a village street, and that's really what it should be. But what that opportunity is everything about making that being a safer and calmer place. I honestly do think that The stuff that can be done in paint is really just an agreement that the town says we should narrow our lanes a little bit. We can very economically put in some of those bicycle facilities that we'd shown in paint with just some stanchions or basically rubber barriers. They're things that have been tried and proven all throughout America very successfully in cold weather climates. That's stuff that can happen relatively soon, in a year or two, to be honest. For major changes to the roadway, putting in a multi-use path, that is in a plan. There's a point that there will be a reconstruction that's needed for Route 1, at least from Desert Road up into downtown and maybe other stretches. That'll take a little bit longer, it needs to be programmed and planned, but that horizon is not 20 years, it's a little closer. Does that help? If you want to add any specificity, feel free.
I can just speak to that sort of midterm, some of those larger improvements that would take some federal funding to probably accomplish. It's probably in that 2 years to design and 3 years to construct, and that includes the seeking of some federal funding. And obviously that landscape is constantly changing, right? So we're keeping up with that, and we have a few projects in that pipeline, to be realistic with you. But it is again in partnership. So the both this vision, but also those next steps are also municipally led. As you identify the desire to engineer, to design one of these elements that you might see tonight, or a shared use path or something like that, those can be incrementally developed with local funding to do the engineering on, and Maine DOT could partner on the construction of it. If we're into the multis of millions of dollars and we're seeking federal funds, that's an application by the department in concert with the town to seek those federal funds, and that does begin now. And takes some period of time. Yeah.
I will put in a quick pitch for the Safe Streets for All program if you haven't heard about it, but they just released another $1 billion that's available just to municipalities in the United States. They've released over $3 billion over the last 3 years, and there's another $1 billion next year that's going to be released. Billions are small numbers in the federal budget, but big numbers for communities. Do you mind coming? Yeah. I'd love to hear from the board, and maybe if you can come to a mic. Oh, we have a remote mic. That would be great. Thank you.
I'll go do it. Here you go. Come on, guys. There's 7 of us. So the multi-use path, I think, is of interest to everybody. And I guess the timing you just said was 2 years to design and maybe 3 years to do it, because I don't think the route of that multi-use path has been established, and it seems to me that's one of the early decisions that we'll have to make. Is that right?
Yeah, I think you guys need to have some sense of where it goes. We know already that it can fit in the right-of-way alongside of Route 1, and so that's a fine place for it pretty much in its entirety, from at least West Street near downtown all the way down past Desert Road. That's a possibility. That's a pretty large project to rebuild with a real safe, with landscaping and drainage taken care of. I mean, that's a construction cost of that is in the millions, many millions. But you can do cheaper versions of that. And that's where I was suggesting that, there's an opportunity for well less than even $1 million to have that whole corridor striped and put in that kind of buffer, stanchions, what have you. So that's something that can be done. And so a design for that can move a little bit faster, and the construction of that is definitely a lot shorter. So I think it comes down to a next step. If folks in town are supportive of these ideas, then the town and the state can actually go chase grants. Usually the next big deadline for the program I was just talking about is this May. But there's always something that comes up regularly, and it's just a matter of saying, well, we have an idea. We've given you the initial impetus of an idea. Evolve that in a little bit more specificity, and maybe hire somebody to draw it up a little bit more cleanly, and begin that process. And that's a matter of, sometimes you don't get the first grant, and then you keep trying. But there's a lot of money out there right now.
Sorry, I have a question, I think, about as you guys were looking and doing your very in-depth analysis, did you identify any specific areas in town that you thought would be particularly challenging from either a land use perspective where the current land use or current zoning doesn't match with a plan, or the transportation on the ground doesn't match the either the plan or the, where there's a mismatch between existing infrastructure and our planning, or maybe an area where you think that we could bring things into better alignment? I'd be curious to, I'm assuming that everything is not perfect already, so I'm curious for your thoughts on
I think as we went down the southern part of the corridor in that Village Gateway area, the existing zoning really does not, as currently written, accommodate this kind of growth. And there's hardly any residential in that area right now as a result of the current zoning. I know that you at the planning board level are in the process of looking at that zoning. So we're very consistent basically with the town's aspirations of where you want to see that growth. But the specific zoning as currently written does need to be revised to be able to accommodate this kind of development. But you're in the process of doing that now. So from that perspective, it does seem like there was nothing that was like a major red flag. On a parcel by parcel level, as we did that build out analysis, there were some parcels that were much less developable than others, had much less of a footprint based on environmental constraints and just their sort of proximity and that kind of thing. But bigger picture, not really, yeah.
And I'd add that we more or less defined areas of growth that are not constrained by steep slopes and the environment and what have you, and that can easily accommodate the kind of development numbers that we're talking about, which is good. But the other barrier, I think, is sort of the obvious one, and that's what we've been talking about, is Route 1 itself. It is a difficult road to live along. We've already heard that. And being able to change that road and make that a slower, more comfortable, multimodal, tree-lined, whatever you can get to, is actually one of the things that can really help land developers respond. And in fact, when we talk about trying to make a more walkable place, when it's really hard to walk along that roadway or just even cross it, that holds back development. It certainly holds back the potential of the kind of development that you want, which is that park once mixed kind of environment. So that is another obvious hurdle, but there are ways to tackle that as well.
My question is, has any study been done to tell if our schools can accommodate this influx of population, all the new units, 700 units, 2,000 units coming up in the years? I mean, what's the capacity at our schools now, and what's the predicted future of the enrollment?
Yeah, we were just talking about that earlier. It's funny, we're not doing that type of a detailed analysis, but it's something that the town can do. I will say this much, though, without doubt, the problem is more the opposite. And this is true everywhere I work across the country, except maybe in some portions of the Sun Belt. School enrollment is down. That's certainly true here. And even with growth, like for so long, lots of communities were very nervous about growth because of that impact, and there's been virtually no impact on schools. We see declines in schools closing more than anything. So I'm not personally overly worried about that, but another thing that you can do as a community has a lot to do with what is that type of development that kind of comes in. Zoning or incentives that encourage units with more bedrooms and bathrooms might be more friendly to families, and that might actually be something you could use because you are maybe in the wrong direction. But also there's other units that are going to be a little bit smaller, one-bedroom studio sizes that are more for workers or for people who are empty nesting and that kind of a thing. But I think in general in Maine, the threat is in the opposite direction so far. But a more detailed study of that is certainly warranted, I'd agree. Go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, just to add a data point real quick. The 700 units or so over the next 10 years is consistent with what we've seen over the previous 10. And if you look at the elementary school enrollment for the Freeport schools within the RSU, those 700 units in Freeport contributed an additional 35 or 40 students. So the numbers aren't as big as you might think based on the historical data. And even since then, I think Jason's alluded to the fact that sort of birth rates are going down. Freeport's an older community within the oldest state in the country. So that risk is important to consider. We looked at it within the dog bone report. In addition to that, many of the units that are being approved right now are smaller. They're studios, they're one bedrooms. And if you look at the national data, a one bedroom apartment contributes something like 0.05 students to the school district. So the type of development that we're thinking about doesn't really elevate that challenge. And the trends suggest that it isn't a challenge to be overly concerned about at this point in time.
I would also add, and I'm sorry, I realize we're getting a little bit off of our plan, but from the planning board's perspective, in response to the school's question, it's something we think about a lot. And I think the type of development that we're talking about here tonight and the type of development or the big plan that's outlined in the comprehensive plan really is trying to address concerns about tax rates. We're trying to, and vacancy rates downtown. We're trying to build a vibrant community that has reasonable taxes and can be affordable to a lot of people. Yes, we are growing at a certain rate, and I don't think that rate is going to accelerate necessarily. And the planning board is hoping to find ways and actively trying to find ways to encourage growth in areas that support the core of our community in this downtown area, support local businesses, support services that serve our community. And we're not actively, at this point, we're not actively discouraging development from rural areas, but preserving the rural character of our town is something we hear again and again as being critically important. And like Brett said, development in denser areas is really well aligned with those goals of supporting a tax base, keeping taxes reasonable, keeping local businesses, and incidentally, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a goal, but incidentally, it's also the type of development that tends to bring fewer school-age children into town. So I think it's, it's something we think a lot about. It's a valid concern, but I think that if we were here talking about how can we maximize, 4,000 square foot houses in cul-de-sacs, if that were our goal, we would be a lot more concerned, or we should all as a community be a lot more concerned about the impact on schools. So valid concern, and one that we're thinking about a lot. Anyone else from the planning board have questions? And if not, Andy, and then once other members of the planning board, we're probably about through our planning board time, members of the council, and then we will open it up to other members of the public.
Yes, Andrew, planning board member, Route 1 South resident. Curious, at some point, it'd be nice if we could see bigger and better maps. I guess you're here tonight, but question from down like through Maine Beer down through there. Years ago, we fought the DOT pretty hard, made sure they put in a turn lane in the center of that so that people could, wouldn't hold up traffic and people could turn. Is it your proposal we do away with that?
Yeah,
Why?
For the most part, it does. Where you actually need turn protection or there's enough volume, turn pockets can be put in. But generally speaking, the center turn lane approach is something that DOTs across the country are going away from more and more. Mostly because that center turn lane has actually increased crash rates significantly, and it becomes it becomes this flex space. At intersections, it's a dedicated turn lane, and where you have intersections and you need turn lanes, those would be retained.
So if we had an increased traffic accident rate in this section?
I don't know the long-term history of it. I'm just saying that DOTs collectively have seen those lanes be a problem.
I was just curious. We're dealing with Freeport.
Right.
Next thing, Route 1 South. I've heard for years that it's unwalkable. We have to have a sidewalk all the way to the Y because kids will walk to the Y. I walk almost every day if the weather's appropriate. I have for 20 years. I don't see anybody else out there walking with me, and you don't see kids walking to the Y. They go in their Volvos or the bus takes them or whatever, and it's sort of a ruse or a canard to say we need a sidewalk. We need a wider shoulder on both sides of the road so people can ride a bike safely on the southbound lane. That would be a big help. You got a 50-foot right-of-way down there in most places. It narrows in certain places. You could widen the other shoulder right, in not too distant future and make it much more bikeable and walkable.
Yeah, I think a lot of what is important about how we look at the roadways and circulation reflects a little bit on what people do and how they respond. So for instance, we even heard it today, there's probably not enough kids walking to the downtown high school. A lot of it may be because sometimes where they live is a little bit further out Route 1, and we hear anecdotally, and having walked it myself, I don't want to walk it. I respect that you are comfortable walking with it, but when we look at the majority of people who want to walk in those spaces or want to walk in general, alongside higher speed traffic is not an environment they want. They want either a row of parked cars, or if there's not the demand, as there isn't down there, a row of trees or a buffer or something. A lot of it has to do with speed. And that cross-section of Route 1 to the south is a design, even if it's posted lower, that can accommodate speeds well over 45 miles an hour. It is a too high a speed from an engineered perspective.
It was designed for 70.
It probably was. I wouldn't be
I lived there.
surprised.
It was designed. It was
Yeah,
a northbound lane in
originally.
95.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But,
Once
you know,
upon a time. And I think
I just don't understand
so.
why
The design, the approach to how
So
you
you're going
deal
to
with
ride
that.
bikes on the sidewalk?
So bikes, it depends on where you're at. And in lots of places, bikes are on the sidewalk, but we recommend that we call them shared use paths, 10 or 12 feet wide. But when it gets to a place where there's lots of pedestrians, they should have their own space. Bikes in the roadway, less than 15% of people who want a bicycle are comfortable bicycling in a roadway. There's this message in the world that's trying to say, let's try to be accommodating for all 8 to 80, people aged 8 to 80. My wife will never let my kids bike, and I'm from Boston where there's bike lanes and stuff, on a bike lane on the road. She wouldn't let me do it. But when there's a separated facility, when there's protection, she's fine with that, and they're safe doing that. And that's not what you have in just a shoulder. So that's why we're talking about something that provides a little bit more buffer. And that's kind of where I think the thinking is evolving. If you have a facility that's actually safe, whenever it's been put in, people use it. If there's not a sidewalk, people aren't going to walk on the dirt oftentimes. They want something that kind of respects that decision they made, because otherwise they're just next to a lot of high-speed traffic. Same goes for bicyclists.
I disagree. That's all right.
Can I just add something? I just wanted to add something real quick. Just sort of on a very technical basis, we actually haven't really looked at the corridor south of Maine Beer Company as well, so we're not like making any recommendations for that section, like between the Y and up here. I know there's plans or a desire from the community for a multi-use path through that area, but nothing in our study is really addressing that specific location either, just to make you aware of that.
I just find it interesting. There's very few
Yeah,
people walk
and-
down there, and all of a
Absolutely.
sudden, everybody's got some idea of how you should walk down there.
Definitely.
It's just,
And everything Jason said, I think, represents our sort of philosophy, but we haven't specifically looked at that area in any.
I just disagree.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So any questions from the council at this time, if you're on the town council?
So I just want to add some context and make sure I understand it right. So basically what I'm about to say is yes and. So all the stuff that we're looking at here is probably tens of millions of dollars of work, and a lot of the work that's going on now is setting the stage so that we know what kind of funding to ask for and what partners we can bring to the table to help with that funding. And a lot of that will fund infrastructure that will set the conditions for the kinds of things that we want to see in town. However, I think it's up to us on the council, the planning board, Meeting House Arts, FEDC, all the people in this room, to paint that vision and make it a reality so we can have a ghost town with narrower streets and wider sidewalks and pretty trees, or we can have a vibrant community. And you guys aren't going to give us a vibrant community at the end of this project and say, pat on the back, here you go. So is that the right context in which to view the work that's going on now? And sort of follow up to that is, should we wait 5 years until this is done and the funding is set and the construction starts before we do all those things?
No, I wouldn't wait at all.
Okay.
And like I said before, you're already on that trajectory, right? You're already thinking about further changes to code. You've approved buildings that sort of fit into this entire idea. You've experimented with changing your streets. You know you can probably do some of that on your own. Those all build momentum. No, I'm not telling you that you're suddenly going to build buildings here and buildings there. That's up to whoever controls that. But you create an environment for that, and people pay attention, and people know that they can do it. And you don't want the infrastructure to be necessary to let that happen. You want it to all happen side by side. You do a little infrastructure and paint, something happens. You do a little bit more infrastructure and concrete, something more happens. You do a little bit more infrastructure in a longer stretch, and much more happens. It's a back and forth.
Good. Thanks.
Other council questions? I think we're happy to have anybody ask a question. I think we have some mics that will be floating around. There's one right there.
Can I just, as a matter of protocol, I'm assuming the protocol is similar to a public meeting where it would be really kind for people to introduce themselves before speaking and make sure you talk into the mic. Thanks.
Sorry, thank you.
Suzanne Watson with Meeting House Arts. I would expect you to think I'd be talking about arts and culture, but I'm going to actually talk about electric infrastructure, electric grid. And I don't hear any discussion about electric grid and what the capacity is in town. But as we tear up roads or change roads or think about that, to bury the infrastructure, to bury the poles, the wires, as we do that would be a huge boon. Eric Smith actually put me onto that. But also three-phase power. Huge opportunity to bring three-phase power down Main Street. We just had a situation with the theater church where we wanted to put commercial-grade heat pumps in instead of replacing gas-fired furnaces. We can't do that without three-phase power. So I highly recommend we start to talk about that as part of the water sewer power.
Yeah, that's great. Those are great comments. Yeah, things we'll try to mention.
Hi, excuse me. My name is Chalmers Hardenberg. I live in over at the condominiums near the railroad bridges. The railroad bridge I want to talk about. I did bring this up yesterday. My two words are asteroid and cork. And I think the wonderful bubbles that came up for the future near term and long term all on the eastern side with a bottleneck, and that is the railroad bridge. So my question is there, I know yesterday Jessica said you're going to be working with the railroad bridge people, but I would really like to see some coordination so that the design of the bridge and its multi-use path are coordinated with a smooth development of the rest of what's going on in the Village Corridor, which I think is terrific.
Yeah, I mean, others can speak to this more intelligently than me, but there's obviously a potential project to have to rebuild that bridge at some point. And I know that the town and Maine DOT are battling with the railroad to try to figure out what that should be. But I think everybody is unanimously agreed that it needs to be a better bridge, whatever comes out of it, accommodates folks who are walking, hopefully has a multi-use path on it as well. But anything like that happens will inevitably have some level of necessary impact and interaction with all the parcels that are around there. And so I don't think that you build a bridge that is multimodal without thinking about that being part of a multimodal system, for instance.
You are also the consultants for the bridge, so...
Yes, we are. Not me, but yes.
Right.
Our firm is following what people tell them to do to help with that design, yes. Yeah.
Unified plan.
Right. Other questions? Anything? There's one in the back, that gentleman. Thank you.
work. I'm Anthony Casada. I live in South Freeport, and I've been here for about 40 years. Sorry.
Just got it.
All right, Anthony Casada, South Freeport. I've been here for 40 years. Nice to see everyone here tonight. Please ignore what has just happened when you answer this question. But if you had a blank slate, would there be a possibility to put a roundabout coming off the highway as you enter Freeport rather than having those 4 intersections? Something maybe to think about over the next 50 years. Obviously, it's not going to happen with the sunk costs that we've just put into those 4 traffic lights, but might be a nice way to enter town.
To roundabouts in general, I know DOTs around the country, and certainly Maine DOT sees a lot of the benefits of them. You don't have to operate a signal, there's no electricity, they're extremely safe, they often have greater capacity, they can frequently make it safer to cross as a pedestrian, but they do take up land, so I mean, it may not be feasible without land takings to put them in. It's something I'm sure that could be considered in the future if there was that ability. I'm sure it's not something you're planning on right now because there's just been improvements to those interchanges, but it is definitely a mechanism that can work well in those locations. We're also thinking that, just for your benefit, that intersection of Desert Road and Route 1 down there can actually be more of a regularized kind of 4-way intersection pretty well, with potentially some of that development in that southern gateway, as we're calling it, kind of close to that. And so it may not be as appropriate for a circulating traffic environment, more of a stopping traffic environment, so folks can cross across. So there's pros and cons to that approach, but there's no reason not to do it in the right context. There's another hand in the back there.
Hi, can people hear me?
Yep.
I'm Allison Burson with the East Coast Greenway Alliance, which is a national organization working on Trail Maine to Florida, which goes through Freeport. I'm also a Freeport resident. I'm going to do the thing I hate most of making a statement, not a comment, but or not giving a question, but making a statement, which is that it's really incredible to see Freeport doing this holistic planning that is thinking about the transportation and the housing all as one. And I'm really excited to share the planning work Freeport has done with a lot of communities, both in Maine, but up and down the whole corridor, because we get so many questions as an organization about how can you have places that are safe for walking and biking, and have housing, and have cars be able to get places. And it's just, Freeport, this is an amazing example, and really excited to see this. So I guess the question is, can we share this with other communities and share what Freeport is doing and share these maps?
Yeah, A, yes, and B, the Village Partnership Program with the state is excellent, because there are other communities trying to do exactly this model. I think Freeport's benefit is that they had already been doing a lot of thinking, and then they have this partnership, and there will be more, and I think it's that whole continuity that really needs to be shared. I'd agree with you that Freeport's done an excellent job of kind of setting the stage for their future and listening and thinking and working in partnership with residents and businesses to set them in a better place. But I do hope other communities in Maine, as well as elsewhere, just think about that, because oftentimes folks are afraid of change and development, and yet it's coming, and then they sit back on their laurels and change comes anyways, and it comes in the wrong fashion. You're gonna model it, you know it's coming, and you're being realistic about casting a smart future. That's great.
Hi, Kathleen Sullivan here. I'm very impressed with the whole idea of the transportation infrastructure needing to change in order to have development and housing development happen here. What I'd like to hear just a little bit about is, I know in all the meetings we've had, people are very much in favor of affordable housing, making sure we really can have our workers here, and that we sort of stop this big gentrification of, you know, great big houses. And really have a much more mixed socioeconomic community. Is there anything that's in this planning structure here, or anything we can be doing as a planning board or zoning, or in terms of financing, to secure that?
I mean, I won't talk for the town in terms of, you know, zoning changes they're thinking about, but I will say that inclusionary zoning is a great way to bring in affordable housing, which is a requirement. The problem is that as a requirement, as a quota almost, there's a lot of resistance to that. And the real bottom line is simply this. Even though I come from Boston and Somerville is a 25% affordability requirement on all new developments. I think they're recently passing it to 30. It somewhat helps, but truthfully, the thing that can make Somerville affordable is simply that there's more units there. And the greater Boston area, that there's more units. They believe they're 55,000 units behind in just greater Boston alone. And that's really where the affordability problem is. There's not enough housing units, period. And, you know, this is a country that grows. We have our kids. We want to have them home. My wife and I don't understand how our kids are ever going to live in the Boston area. And that's not going to be solved with inclusionary housing ordinances. I think that can be helpful. It's going to be solved if there's just a lot more units, and a lot more units. So things that you're talking about here, first of all, 2,000 to 3,000 units is nothing in the grand scheme of things. It sounds like a lot in Freeport, but it's just barely going to be able to help start making a dent in that. But some of it has to do with what that housing is. A smaller unit is automatically a more affordable unit, is automatically going to be for somebody who's just starting out or a worker who's working on other shifts, and that's important. And we need to think about being able to accommodate that type of development as much as possible. And I think that, you know, the town has got a very creative zoning planner, and they're being very creative about how the zoning gets established, I think, in coordination with the planning board, and that will help. Go ahead.
Comment about that. Just coming from the planning board, part of the dog bone, you've heard us talk about the dog bone work group. That was a project we did about a year ago to study how we could get tax increment financing across this village gateway. But the work that we've been doing on zoning and in the comprehensive plan and in the downtown vision all talks about housing, particularly downtown, and particularly dense and particularly small. And in that dog bone report, we talked about what we call the missing middle. And if you look at the housing in Freeport, we have a lot of big houses and we have very few small houses. And the result is that the demographics of Freeport are missing 20 to 35-year-olds. We have a dearth of 20 to 35-year-olds that live in the town, and we also have a problem with elderly who want to move out of their house, stay in the town, and can't find that housing. So the plan is to build more smaller units. That's partly answers the question about schools. If we could not build so many big houses, because we have a lot of those, and try to fill in the middle, that does a lot for affordability. And just as the comments were just made, stock is the biggest help. There's always financing opportunities to, you know, bring in affordable housing, but that requires a financing plan and a place to put it. But the number one tool we can do is to build more smaller units. And the two projects that are going to happen, one right next door here, that's 45 units, that's 550, it's 45 one-bedroom, 550-unit apartments. And so that fills a real need that we have in this town, and it'll help make the downtown much more vibrant.
Just add on to what Mitch was talking about. Kyle Drexler, town planner. So, right, I mean, if you have a lower density allowance and people build housing, they have a certain amount as a developer that they're looking to make, right? So they're going to build bigger units with more bedrooms. So just like what Mitch was talking about, we've seen downtown recently with a couple of projects. We don't have a density requirement in our downtown core district, so it lets people build smaller units, but more of them. So we get those more affordable units. So like was being talked about at the beginning of the presentation, if we extend some of those ideas down to other zones and not just exclude it to the VC1 downtown, we can start to see more of that denser but small unit housing come forward as developers see that as like an actual feasible option rather than building the larger 3+ bedroom homes, because well, that's all they're allowed to do, so of course that's what they're going to do. If we can provide more options, people will come forward with a better variety of projects. So, yeah, I think we're on that path.
Dan Pilch from the Town Council again. I just want to add to what Mitch and Kyle are saying. We've been chipping away at some of these things over the years. So we've allowed for denser development downtown. We've reduced the amount of parking that we require retailers to have. We've made these little changes, and they're working. So stuff is happening. We've got 50-odd units going in behind Antonia's senior affordable. We've got the project that Mitch was talking about in the works here, 45 units, 1 bedroom, 2 lots down from here. We've got 51 units approved for the lot next to Sea Love across from Old Navy. Altogether, that's 150 units added to the 156 I think we did in Crosstree 2023 or so. That's 10% more housing in Freeport than we had less than 5 years ago. So we are moving, things are happening. Please don't take what I'm saying as a way to say we need to take our foot off the gas pedal. Like, we need to keep it there and keep doing this. But the answer, part of the answer to affordable housing is more housing. The median price of a house in Maine between 2015 and 2025 has more than doubled. More than doubled in 10 years. So Freeport is doing a lot. We're doing our part. We're not going to solve that Maine housing crisis in Freeport, but with our neighboring towns and communities, I think we're definitely on the right path, and this is all part of that, I think.
Other questions, comments? Been here about an hour and a half, so I don't want folks to feel like they have to stay all night long, but if there's a topic we haven't covered, we're happy to address it. Go right ahead. If there's a floating mic somewhere still, I don't know where it wound up. Here it is, right there.
My name is Bob Stevens, and I was particularly taken by what our town planner, Kyle, suggested, is that we not just look at the downtown area and increasing density here, but if in fact we are going to be able to create more housing, it's going to have to be out in some areas that are a little bit further out and that might be a resident, or R3, R2. I'm not up to date on the zoning, but I don't think we can restrict this to just the downtown and say we have to maintain the rural areas the way they are now. We can't get the housing that way. That was my comment.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think anybody wants to restrict it, but naturally I can see a lot of the stuff is happening in the downtown right now because that's a place to be adjacent to. But as our analysis showed, there's other places that are kind of ripe. So I think there's some opportunity there. We just hope that it all kind of comes in the right way. Well, thank you so much. This has been great feedback. Again, we hope to be back again. Brett, do you want to close it out?
Just kind of a logistical point. We're going to be posting this meeting, the video, as well as the slides. If you go to the town website, you'll see a link on the homepage for the Village Corridor Initiative. And there's a lot of information there about the infrastructure planning, a lot of information and background on the TIF funding that we've talked about tonight, and then a lot of information about some of the zoning updates that are going to allow all this to happen. So go to freeportmaine.com. You'll see a tab that says Village Corridor Initiative. That will take you to a resource where we'll have this posted tomorrow. You can do look at it in more leisurely and more detail. And then the next big moment is February 3rd, where our friends from Stantec will be spending the next couple weeks to distill what they heard tonight and bring back the next round of plans and iterations for the council to review at 5 p.m. at Town Hall on February 3rd. Thank you, guys.